Dean Gordonitis Unleash This Book Reviews, bringing you new book reviews when I finish my books that I'm reading on like contemporary literature, that modern kind of stuff, usually literary fiction, but I check out all sorts of stuff, including like graphic novels and comic books, sometimes some literary magazines, whatever I'm kind of interested, I shoot to you. And if you kind of like the style I'm going for, don't forget to subscribe up above. Follow me on Twitter down below. The likes and thumbs ups help a lot in getting the word out. And today, after I thank you for that, talking about Don DeLillo's White Noise, which was published in 1985, won the National Book Award. As you can see, I got a lot of notes here. It's kind of a staple in the postmodern literary culture niche movement thing. The story revolves around, for a short synopsis here, Jack Galati, who is the father of 4 children and is now on his 4th wife. And they live in a college town where he teaches as a professor in the Hitler Studies department, which is obviously a little odd, but the story is really deeply connected with modern American culture. And even though it was written in 1985, it seems to be becoming more and more important as every day passes since then. There's a lot of this modern American culture here, which is also largely gripped in consumerism. And I mean, for a few notes here, there's constantly commercials, just little clips of like the end of jingles that are just kind of thrown in here or there, peppered throughout the story, whether it's coming from a TV that's playing in the background or a radio talk show that's going on, all these almost subconsciously, to the point that one of Jack's children is sleeping in the backseat of the car one time and she starts moaning repetitively, Toyota Celica, you know, kind of interesting stuff. The town supermarket plays a big part here, and it's interesting because it's a calming place where people go to relax, you know, a normal like Sunday ritual, but they find this relaxation in a place where they're constantly being stimulated, barraged by bright colors and bright graphics and big sales and all that kind of stuff. And what's interesting is actually near the end of the story, they rearrange the layout of the supermarket and the people flip out, because the one place where they could kind of go where things weren't changing, they could always find their salt on the same rack wherever that was, is now changing as well. It's kind of cool. Babette, who is Jack's wife, actually goes and she reads to the elderly who have problems seeing, maybe they're blind, and they don't ask to be read classic books or the new top sellers. They want to be read the tabloids. A lot of interesting kind of jabs at what the American culture is now turned into. But of course, that can be kind of shallow, not necessarily cheap, but if you're looking for, you know, some really good writing, that's not necessarily doing a whole lot for you. And this book does do a lot more. I have, as you see here, more points. A big layer here is death. Death plays a huge part in this story. Both Jack and Babette are both like very scared of dying. They're constantly trying to find ways to avoid it, and that's kind of where the story kind of develops, is around their fear of death, which is interesting because in a culture where we're constantly trying to be entertained, it's as if we're trying to, you know, push away those thoughts of fear of death, and for most people that works. Americans don't really tend to think about death that much, not nearly as much as other cultures, but from Jack and Babette, it seems to have somehow pushed through the surface anyway, and they are constantly afraid of it, and it plays a big part in the way that they work with what happens in the story. Now, what's interesting is Jack is very afraid of plots. You know, being a college professor, he has all these theories and stuff, and one of his theories is that all plots, whenever they're written out, whether they're in stories or real life, lead towards death. It's the only ending that can be really found. And so Jack tries to do his best to live a plotless life, and that's very apparent in the first of the 3 sections of this story. The story kind of meanders around, not a whole lot happens. We get a lot of description on the family and character background, but story-wise, not a lot happens. But that changes, because Because in the second part of the story, the airborne toxic event happens, which is this chemical explosion that happens nearby, and everybody has to kind of evacuate, and Jack accidentally inhales some of this for a couple minutes, and he now finds out that death is going to happen to him sooner or later. Maybe not right away, but this chemical is now inside of him. And when that happens is when the plot kind of kicks in this story, and it continues all the way through the end, almost to comical purposes by the end. It's almost as if it's a satire, as if DeLillo's making fun of plots, the way the plot really becomes so predictable by the end. The last like 30 pages or so, it kind of builds towards this climactic ending that actually does have death involved in it in a different way. Jack doesn't die, won't tell you that much, but you know, death plays a big part here. Now also, simulated reality is here too, and I mean, we can all attest to this with the internet and video games and how this is all happening, but this book was written before that, which is pretty interesting. We have, for example, Babette, his wife, is featured on TV, and the children and the father, Jack, all kind of look at it and are kind of oddly, you know, affected by this. They're seeing their mom, but it's not really their mom. It's a TV screen, and it's just a weird experience. Jack goes to get evaluated about his life, and it's all done with numbers and on a computer, and you know, trying to find out how long he has for this chemical to kill him. All very simulated. Simuvac, I believe it is. Simuvac comes in, and they are like an evacuation team in the city to help out with this chemical that explodes. But rather than actually being an evacuation crew, they major in simulated experiments of what to do in case of a breakout of this case, and that's what they spend 90% of their time on, is on these fake events that haven't really happened. Kind of cool idea, this whole simulated reality type thing that goes along in with this death and American culture. Let's see what I got here lastly. Conversations in this story, I loved this, and I think it's even more relevant today. The family of all these children and the mom and dad will have these conversations at times, but it almost seems as if nobody's really listening to each other. They do listen in a superficial way, but rather than responding to other people's comments in a thoughtful way and staying on topic, it's this random barrage and changing of topics from one thing to the next. So the father talks about rain, and then the mother / wife talks about how water is, I don't know, not really prevalent in the Sahara Desert, and then their son says, yeah, well, did you know in the Sahara Desert there's a problem with the camels? And then the daughter says, oh, camels, I learned that some camels have 2 humps and some camels have 3. Now that didn't really happen in the story, but that's sort of like the process of their conversations. Nothing ever stays on track. It's this constant sort of tangent after tangent, and nothing really substantial gets really spoken about, which is an interesting thought as far as the way that families connect and talk to each other too. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and say that I completely got everything about this book, because it's considered very, very huge as far as influence goes. I know a lot of people say David Foster Wallace relied heavily on the steps that DeLillo made, so I'm very interested to hear what you guys have found from digging into this book, maybe reading it more often than me, see what you guys think. I definitely enjoyed it. I think it was worth reading. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everybody, but if you're into sort of like a modern dystopian feel, this isn't a dystopian as far as like the world is crumbling, but almost how like we're living in a dystopia in this totally normal everyday life that we have right now, is in a way. That's what kind of really struck me. You know, this might be something you might be interested in. Definitely, I can see its importance in literature. I can see how it's influenced authors since then, and I think that by itself says a lot. Don DeLillo, White Noise. I'll see you guys next week with some more reviews. I got some things lined up, and until then, take care of yourselves. All right, see ya.